Hey, I'm Matt. Today I'll show you how to build a cross-cut sled that's safer and more functional. First thing I want to do is show you the safety features and the functional features of this cross-cut sled, and then I'll show you how to make it. You can build this cross-cut sled to fit virtually any table saw. What makes it safer, I believe, is it has handles on either side of the sled that allows you to hold on to that and push through your cut. What that does is it ensures that your hand is never going to be where that blade exits the back of the sled. And should the blade exit the back of the sled, we have a cover over that so that it's still encased in wood. And the only way it would come out is if you actually push the sled almost all the way off your table saw. It also features clamping capabilities for small parts and an adjustable fence, so you can actually cut miters on this should you choose. And of course, we have a stop block for repeatable cuts. I'll show you how to make this crosscut sled right after I tell you about today's sponsor, Carbide 3D, maker of the Shapeco line of CNCs. You'll notice in the background of today's build video that you're going to see the Shapeco running a lot. And that's one of the main things I really love about the Shapeco is it's over there working, doing its own thing while I'm working on either other parts of the same project or its own project. I think every woodworker could benefit from having a CNC in the shop because it's going to actually give you an extra set of hands, but it's going to be able to help you customize projects, whether you're making cutting boards, serving trays, anything like that, to actually engrave a custom logo on the top, last names, last name initials, anything like that to kind of beef up what you're already offering. It's really easy to get started with Shapeco CNCs because Carbide provides their own software that's free, Carbide Create, as well as Carbide Motion to actually help you run the machine itself. And Carbide 3D machines come with everything you need to get started: training, support, work holding, dust collection attachments, and the hybrid table, as well as your CNC machine. If you'd like to learn more about Shapeco or see all the machines they actually have, go check out carbide3d.com, see which one's right for you. For this project, you only need a half a sheet of plywood, a piece of T-track, a stop block, and then a MicroJig Dovetail clamp. I'm going to start by making the fence, and I'm going to rip two pieces 4 inches wide by 48 inches long. This is a total reenactment because I forgot to film this part. Once those are cut out, we're going to glue those together. I used a 4-foot I-beam style level to clamp to those pieces, and that'll keep it nice and straight. After the glue dried, I brought it to the jointer and jointed one side, and then to the table saw and ripped the other side so I have two parallel sides, and then I cut it to size at 3.5 inches wide. Next, over to the router table. You can also use a hand router if you don't have a table. I'm going to set this 3/4 inch bit at 3/8 inch deep using this setup block. Then we're going to route that right in the middle of the top of the fence. That's where our T-track is going to go. Then I cut the fence 35.5 inches long. Do not throw away that scrap piece. We're going to use it later. I'm just using standard 3/4 inch plywood, nothing special. You can buy it at the home store. For the sled itself, I'm going to rip a piece about 32 inches wide, and we're going to cut that down a little bit more later. This again is a reenactment. I forgot to film that part. Next thing I did was use 2 pieces of hard maple for my miter runners, and we're going to use some washers to set in there. That's going to keep those runners raised up just above the table surface. Put a little bit of CA glue on each one of those, and then I spray activator on the sled itself, or on the piece of plywood we cut out earlier. Using the fence as a guide, we'll keep it nice and square. Then we set it down on those runners and let that dry for a minute or so. Next, pre-drill and countersink some screws from those runners into your sled. Be careful that you don't split the runners because if you do, it'll spread them out and it won't fit in your slots anymore. I want to test fit that mainly to make sure it doesn't move side to side. It may be a little sticky right now as far as sliding forward and back, but we're going to fix that later as well. Now you raise the blade up through the sled just to cut you a slot, and if you can guess what's happening here, comment below, because I couldn't figure it out. I thought, why not just clamp it down? Well, that didn't work either. Riving knife. I'm a dummy. I never take my riving knife off, so I actually didn't even think about it. It was going to push that up. It won't let the blade come up. I have to take it off for just this part. Once the riving knife was out, then it worked like it was supposed to. I felt really dumb, but it happens. You don't want to cut a real big slot just yet. Next thing I did was take my fence and screwed in one screw to the right side. That's going to be our pivot point. Then take a framing square and square this up as much as possible to that line you just cut. I marked this spot so I could lift this up just a little bit and clamp that in place. Then I drove a screw from underneath. Once that was done, I cut those runners off flush with the end of the sled. You don't have to do this, I just wanted it to look a little cleaner. I removed the fence so that I could cut these slots. I can put the screws back in the same holes. We're going to use the match fit system here because it's so easy to use and it works really well. All you need is this dovetail bit from Match Fit, Set this at 3/8 inch deep, and then you route those grooves. If you have dust collection here, it helps a lot. This is at 4x speed, just so you know how fast I was going. I was actually taking it really slow because I needed those grooves to be really straight. And I stopped just where the fence was going to be. Next, I use my palm router and just put a little bit of chamfer on the front bottom edge of the fence. What that's going to do is give a groove for the sawdust to go so we don't get a bunch piled up and throw off our cuts. I cut these little small blocks to install our handles on, and I'm just kind of test fitting here and seeing where exactly I want everything. Notice the outside blocks are shorter than the inside blocks. For the back fence, I'm taking an offcut of the front fence and just cutting a couple of dog ears on it. It's going to give us a little room to be able to maneuver those clamps by later. While fitting the blade guards in place, I thought, man, it would be nice if it was totally covered, and I remembered I had this piece of fence. It worked out perfect. Then I could just mark out the same design and cut that out. Put that in place, that's going to work great. I wanted to trim the sled up a little bit to give it a little, just to take away some of that bulk that's on the back side. This here I just flushed up to the back of those blade guards and then just kind of eyeballed everything else kind of how I wanted it. And then you can use a circular saw or a plunge saw to cut these off. For the back fence, you're going to use glue, spread that out really good. I'm going to clamp this in place and then drive 2 screws from underneath. That'll hold it in place. That's all it needs. To get that perfectly smooth glide on the table saw sled, what I did was just take some 120 grit sandpaper and hand sanded these runners just a little bit on each one until I got it to slide just how I wanted it. You may take a little trial and error here to get it to slide just right. Next, I'm using the 5-cut method. If you've never used this before, I'll drop a link in the description below to a video that explains it in great detail. Basically, you're going to cut 4 cuts, and then on the 5th cut, like you see here, you'll measure the off cut at the top and at the bottom. Then you'll use the 5-cut method calculator, and this will give you your tolerance of how much you're out. Mine was 0.02, so I used a 0.02 feeler on these feeler gauges. Set that between the block and the fence, and then move the fence back to the block. Clamp that in place and screwed it down. This should make it really, really close to perfectly square. Then you do the 5-cut method again to see how far out you are. Mine was within 0.0007, something like that. It was so close that it would never matter. Then you put several screws in there to lock it in place. I'm using an 1¼ inch Forstner bit here to drill about 1/4 inch deep so that we'll have a place for those handles to sit. Just remember 2 blocks will have holes on one side, 2 blocks will have holes on the opposite side. Then I just use a 120 grit and kind of smooth those over a little bit. Wood glue on the bottom and the edge against the fence, and I actually glued this blade guard in place as well. Then I cut this dowel rod to length, put a little wood glue in both slots as well as on the end, then just use wood glue to secure everything here as well. Wipe up any excess because you will have a little bit of squeeze out there. We're going to do the same thing on the other side, but the right side of my sled has a little bit shorter of a handle. There was a void on this plywood, so I decided to fill it with CA glue while I was doing this. I took some 1¼ brad nails from underneath to secure all the pieces in place. This will hold it till the glue dries. After the glue dries, you'll not have to worry about it. One of my least favorite things to do is cut aluminum with the miter saw, and that's what I'm doing here. Cut it to length to fit inside the fence. Once I was happy with the fit, then I just used a little bit of CA glue to give it a little extra hold to go along with the screws we're going to install. Took 120 grit and sanded over all the sharp and rough edges on this sled. Before you put your sled into prime time action, I highly recommend putting some type of lubricant on the bottom, some type of wax. I'm going to use Outlaw's board butter. It's going to give it a nice smooth, slick finish so that it glides even smoother on your saw. Now you can use paste wax or whatever you have. Make sure you hit those rails really well, and then also the bottom side is all you'll have to do. If you want to put some on the top, you can. It'll help protect it. It won't hurt anything for sure. As far as the adjustable fence goes, I made this one 14 inches long by about 1.5 inches wide, and then I just cut a groove in the middle, and you can see that it's just, it's not the greatest groove, but it doesn't have to be perfectly straight. MicroJig makes this dovetail hardware that will slide right into those grooves we routed. You'll only need to undo one of them. The other one will slide right in. If you're just cutting 45s, you can obviously use a speed square, or you can use a T-bevel or any other angle finder that you have to set the angle of this to make those cuts. I don't use this very often. That's why I like that it's removable and I can just store it out of the way when not in use. A couple of things to note about the sled is on the back fence, I did leave about 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch on each side. That way when you go to slide your clamps in there, nothing is going to be obstructed. Now we're going to try some test cuts. I'm going to cut a few pieces using the match fit system to hold these small parts. I really like how well and secure they hold, and I like that my hands are out of the way of the blade now. Using the adjustable fence, we can cut miters as well. Because we used the offcut of the fence, you can see it actually makes a dust ejection port if you don't have dust collection. But if you do have dust collection, very little dust comes out of that. Two major differences in this sled versus the previous version I did is obviously the handles make it a safer sled in my opinion, because you're not worried about ever having your hand next to the back. My old one had that big knot on the back, and while it works, I was always worried that I would forget and put my hand there. So I wanted to make a safer sled for myself. And the fence is taller. I found that the other fence was a little short for some things, and I just wanted one that was a little bit taller. I think the other one was about 2 inches. This one's 3.5. The reason I went again with the MicroJig system to clamp small parts down is because it reduces the weight versus installing T-track and another layer of 1/2-inch plywood on top. This is a lighter weight sled. It's easier to move on and off the saw. And I actually like the MicroJig system because it's easy to use, it's easy to install on a sled like this, and it holds everything nice and tight. You can use any style stop block you want on top. The reason I went with this one is because it matched the T-track. That's really the only reason. There are plans available for this sled. I'll put a link in the description below. If you have the previous version of the sled or you bought the shop bundle before today, let me know by emailing or use the contact form on the website, and I'll get you a free copy of these plans to update the ones that you have already. If you like this shop project, go check out my DIY tool cart. You can click that box right there. Clicking that box gets you the big old virtual fist bump. Also, another one of my favorite shop projects right there. Thank you for watching.